Welcome in, everybody. I am Jack Anderson, Upper Left Performance podcast host and sports performance coach. Just wanted to get at you with something that I've been working on here recently, and it is environmental considerations for human flourishing in sport. I think a lot of us talk about that first tab on the top, human being first, athlete second. But I took a deep dive over the last couple of weeks just to really think about what that means and how it aligns with my other principles and make sure it all kind of flows nicely. And this is what I set up. This is the result of that deep dive here. And I just wanted to get into it and explain it to you guys a little bit, just so you can maybe improve your processes and thinking about all the things that go into being an athlete and just the holistic nature that we need to take when training athletes and interacting with them. So at the top here, of course, like I said, we have human being first, athlete second. And that's going to break into two junctures. What are the athlete goals and what are the human goals? I think looking at the right side first and coming over to the human goal section here, I'll use my cursor to kind of illustrate the point. We want to foster an environment that's conducive to success, an environment that they perceive to be a safe one so that they will then trust the training and the interactions they have in the training environment to make themselves better, both as humans and athletes. Number two, a clear communication is very important. Going forward, once we have established that environment, we want to communicate the goals, the plans, the actions that we're going to do to lead to improvement. We're going to instill a sense of control for the athlete. We want the athlete to feel like they are in control of something. We talk about creating autonomy for athletes a lot and letting them make their own choices. Part of that is we provide a plan and we guide them through the plan. We lead them through it. But at the same time, we want them to take charge of some of their own training and some of their own decision-making within the environment, because that is what they will be doing in a more dynamic, competitive environment away from training, where all vestiges of coaching are kind of removed from their guidance. And then number four down here, we're going to establish a support system. Robert Sapolsky has a great book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, and he outlines 4 coping mechanisms, and they're underlined throughout this flow chart, and then they're also listed in full down here in this first red box. Support system is one of the biggest ones in Sapolsky's mind, and if we're fostering a good environment, communicating and giving our athletes control of and autonomy within a program, we become one of the first lines of their support system, and then that gives them the comfort to branch out and get support from other people in terms of friends, family, teammates, etc. So we all kind of make up this system that will allow them to cope with any stressors or adverse situations that are thrown their way. Those are the human goals. And we need to think about those things throughout the left-hand side of the process over here, throughout this athlete goals, principles, action plan, all that kind of stuff. And what we're doing on the coaching side, the communication piece, the environment piece, the support system piece, it all needs to be ongoing throughout the left-hand side of the process. It always needs to be in consideration. And at the end, it'll line up very nicely with the results that we see down here. And we'll get to that in a minute. Looking over the athlete goals, though, once we flip back over to the left-hand side, Zach Couples does a great job detailing the athlete goals. Be the best. Duh. Be the best for as long as possible. The first one is a performance-related concept. The second is a health-related concept. Health and performance operate on a continuum. When we target one, it usually comes at the expense of the other. For example, we can try to increase our performance, on the field for as much as we can. But once we get to a certain level of performance, risk of injury goes up. That's just the way it is, based on physiological changes, physiological demands, and what's going on. At an elite level of play, the risk of injury just gets higher. That's the way it is, which means we need to train for some for health in some capacity. On the flip side, though, of course, if we train just for health, we're leaving performance gains on the table. We're not training to our full potential, and we're going to miss out on being the best athlete that we can be. So every athlete and individual is going to need something different when we talk about health and performance, and they're going to need some combination of both, and it's up to us to figure out what combination is needed for each individual athlete. And that kind of touches on these 2 points down here. With health, we're looking to build resiliency. And if you look at the second red box, Bill Hartman does a great job outlining the 3 resiliency traits in his book, All Gain, No Pain. First one being variability, second adaptability, and third recoverability. All of these are extremely important towards building health, and then adaptability or adaptation is also going to be very important on the performance side as well. On the performance side, we're training for the ability, obviously, to be the best and to build mastery of sport. Once we determine what combination of health and performance we need to put forth an action plan. We need to have a plan, which is, again, we remember that's going to help the athlete feel like they have control over a situation, which is very important. There's a great study in All Gain, No Pain that references those in high stress environments, but with the feeling that they have very low control over their environment, mortality rates skyrocket. We get stuck in chronic stress loops, and we're unable to react ideally in adverse situations. On the flip side, if you instill a perception of control in a high stress environment, mortality rates actually decrease. And we are able to manage our stress much, much better. So that's what this action plan is for, to do that. So we will identify the principles as a coach that we want to abide by. They should already be in place before the action plan begins. We then need to identify physical characteristics that are needed for that athlete. Which ones do we want to develop? And then once we know which ones we want to develop, we're going to use the specific adaptation to impose demands principle to pick the right modalities. And then we're going to use progressive overload on those modalities. So changing variables, be it volume, intensity, velocity, or force. We're going to change those variables and progress them over time to get the adaptation we want in training that will then translate over to sport success. Looking at the principles down here, I'm going to just cover these very, very quickly. The number one thing is the nervous system. The brain controls everything. It's going to control the position of the skeleton. Which is then in turn going to control the position of the muscles. So as strength and conditioning coaches, we often think about things at the muscular level, muscular growth, and muscular development. But we have to remember there are some overarching things in terms of the skeleton and the nervous system that are going to have a little bit more of a say in what the position of the muscles are and how the muscles are going to be in a human being. The nervous system is very important. We want to make sure that we understand that if it perceives a threat, it's not going to allow us to express variability in posture or position or anything like that. And we need to be able to express a variety of positions and postures in order to be successful in sport. Being very extension driven and sympathetic driven as a human being, which a lot of us tend to be, can be a problem. And we need to make sure that we can get out of that and show variability in our system so that the skeleton and muscles can then do their job properly without compensatory movements. Number 4, asymmetry. The body, thanks to PRI, we know the body is asymmetrical. We favor the right side of our body a lot more than we do the left, and that can lead to a host of compensations, injuries, and overuse injuries. So we need to understand that we need to restore, again, variability back to the left side of the body. And we need to also not train to be symmetrical, but train according to what we know in terms of the right side has things in it that the left side doesn't have, and vice versa. And that's going to lead us down the path of knowing that we have to train things a little bit asymmetrically in order to get variability into the system. And that's number 5, variability in posture and position. To me, posture is there is no one perfect posture. It's the ability to display multiple positions and postures according to what is needed. If we have more movement literacy, we're just going to be better off in a more dynamic sport situation. Number 6, proximal stability, creating distal mobility, very important. We know that if we think proximally within the trunk and organize bones and activate muscles in the trunk correctly, it's in turn going to set up a chain reaction that allows us to have some more distal mobility. So we're not looking at things from a reductionist mindset of, oh, my hip hurts, let's look at the hip, or oh, my knee hurts, let's look at the knee. Let's look at the structures above it, establish some stability within those structures, and that will usually clean up a lot of the issues we see in distal tissues and structures. Number 7, neural readiness, which we can think of as intensity, and then tissue preparedness we can think of as volume. Neural readiness is just daily readiness. What are the athletes' daily habits, and do they leave them in a position to be ready to go at a given day? And then secondly, with the tissue preparedness side of things, we need to make sure we're not prescribing loads that are ridiculously too high or ridiculously too low. We need to know what the person is accustomed to as an athlete in terms of the stress they put on their tissues, and then slowly increase load over time instead of doing it all at once. We want to stimulate the tissue. We do not want to annihilate it, because remember, this is an ongoing, slow-cooked process. It's not something we just change in a week in terms of an athlete's body. Number 8, stress consolidation and microdosing. That factors in very nicely there. We want to make sure that we're hitting all the stressors that we want to hit. We're hitting the intensities and the volumes that we want to hit, and we're doing it frequently and in smaller doses. Minimum effective dose will usually lead to optimal results. We want to make sure that the training of today does not disrupt what we have planned for tomorrow. And of course, we don't want it to disrupt competition. Number 8 down here, number 9, single leg stance and gait is number 10. Those go hand in hand. Gait is a dynamic form of single leg stance. Again, we know we are a little more right side dominant than left, which does certain things to the positions of each limb and has us biased towards the right stance. And we want to make sure that we eliminate some of that bias and restore a little bit of variability back to the left side of the body, especially in gait when it becomes more dynamic, so we don't have overuse injuries and we don't end up missing games. Number 11, it ties it all together very nicely. Triplanar competency, very important concept. We need to make sure that we have sagittal plane competency and all the muscles that go with that are locked and loaded. And then we move on to frontal plane, and then of course transverse plane. Rotational power is probably the tippy top of the components we're after in team field sports. Number 12, force and velocity. So we just want to make sure, again, whatever loads we're giving someone, we're doing it with an emphasis on either producing a lot of force or doing things very swiftly. Again, depending on how the person is predisposed, we will adjust those prescriptions accordingly. Once we have our principles in place, before we pick the modalities, we just want to know what physical characteristics we're going to work on. We could work on breathing, strength, speed, conditioning, agility, change of direction, quickness, or recovery. We can work on any of those things, just depending, again, on time of year, what the person needs, where they're at, etc. And remember, throughout this entire process of making the plan, we have to keep in mind the human aspect of this. We have to keep in mind that we need to be flexible as practitioners so that the athletes are getting the stimulus on a given day that they need based on how they are. Because remember, humans are not robots. They're going to present in different ways daily. And we have to kind of adapt to that and adapt the plan accordingly. And if we look below, we look at the results of this. If we look at the results of our human and athlete considerations, we are providing on the human side an outlet for frustration with this plan and of action. Everyone needs an outlet for frustration. Very important concept. And then number 2, we're giving them a perception of life improving if we're doing everything correctly. And if a human being perceives life is improving, then all the tasks that happen throughout their day just become that much more manageable and feasible, and the results just get that much better. We get the adaptations, which is number 3 down here. We get the adaptations that we want athletically. And so if we look at things from a human lens first, usually the adaptation we want and the success we want for the athlete is a byproduct of us just feeding into them being a good human. Obviously, we need training. Obviously, we need to be genetically predisposed to being elite. But the human side will never go away because that is a commonality between all of us. We all need these coping mechanisms, and we all need a plan, and we all need people in our lives that are impacting us for the better. I'll leave you with this. Sean Accor, he wrote The Happiness Advantage, talked about just how happiness to him is human flourishing, and human flourishing is usually when one is pursuing their potential. And I think that's very important. I think that as coaches, we're in a unique position where we're allowed to help people reach their full potential and make them feel like they're flourishing as a human, which in turn will foster happiness. And if we look at it through this holistic lens of both humanity and athleticism, I think it will be the quickest way towards developing great athletes and great human beings, both of which are very important in our society today. Thank you very much.